by scratching the surface, you get a terrible shock. It's it's a heinous crime. People are so shocked by what...
Camilla had prepared herself for hostile headlines, family tension, even another humiliating palace dispute. She had not prepared for a judge to order open the one record she believed would never see daylight. Within minutes, a sealed archive linked directly to Queen Elizabeth II was unlocked. The first pages of a forbidden private diary were placed before the court, and Camilla realized that something buried for years had suddenly become impossible to control. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla read the first line of the legal notice twice. She lowered it and asked the question no one wanted answered. Who had authorized the challenge to the seal? The court order, a binding legal direction requiring the disputed archive to be opened, had exposed more than a document. It had stripped away the barrier she believed would hold forever. The diary had been separated from ordinary royal papers because Elizabeth filled it with private judgments about family loyalty, succession fears, and the crown after her death. These were not ceremonial notes. They were unguarded thoughts. Charles entered moments later and knew something had shifted. The king watched Camilla push the ruling toward him, then stop. When he reached for the page, she placed her hand over it. She wanted anger from him. She wanted immediate condemnation. Instead, the monarch hesitated, and that cut deeper than any accusation. Camilla asked whether he intended to defend the unsealing. Charles answered that he first needed to understand what had been opened and why. For the queen consort, caution sounded dangerously close to doubt. A court clerk's documented notice made the danger worse. Several recovered pages concerned decisions from Elizabeth's final years, and one entry referred more than once to an effort to make certain material disappear from the family record. The phrase landed like a threat because it suggested the diary contained a record of resistance and intent. Camilla said nothing, but Charles noticed her reaction and asked what she already knew. She did not answer. Then came the revelation she had believed impossible. The original diary had never been the only copy. A second authenticated version had been secured inside a protected archival deposit, meaning a controlled storage site beyond ordinary household access. Someone had ensured the pages could survive even if the first archive remained sealed. Suddenly, the most dangerous question was no longer what Elizabeth had written, but who had known the duplicate existed all along. When Charles finally began to read what his mother preserved, the crisis stopped being legal and became painfully personal. The first shock belonged to Camilla. The second belonged to Charles. Alone with the extracted pages, the king reached a passage that changed everything. Not because it contained an accusation, but because it recorded a fear his mother had carried to the end. He stopped reading. The paper remained in his hands. For several seconds, the man expected to defend his wife could not look at her. Charles felt trapped between two loyalties that refused to coexist. Camilla was his wife, the woman he had spent years protecting, while Elizabeth remained the mother whose private judgment still carried a weight no legal ruling could create. The diary extract, a verified portion taken from the sealed personal record, contained a warning about resentment surrounding Diana and the damage it could inflict on William's future relationship with Camilla. The king read the passage again, slower this time. Camilla refused to let silence become a verdict. She told Charles that private diary entries were feelings, not judgments carved into law, and he agreed. But agreement was not reassurance. The monarch could not dismiss his mother's words, and that hesitation wounded the queen consort more deeply than anger would have. When he finished the page, he folded his glasses, placed them beside the extract, and said, "I need a moment before I answer you." Camilla looked at him, stunned by how distant he sounded. William received a notice afterward. The prince was told through a documented court communication that his name appeared repeatedly across the sealed material, and he refused every request for an immediate public response. As heir, the family member next in line to inherit the crown, his position made the contents personal, because any mention of Diana, Camilla, or Elizabeth's fears touched both his past and the monarchy he was expected to lead. William asked to read the pages before speaking to his father. Catherine noticed the change before anyone else. William read the first extract beside her, then became unnaturally controlled, choosing each word as though one careless sentence could reopen years of buried grief. She asked what Elizabeth had known. He answered only that his grandmother had anticipated a confrontation the family never managed to resolve. Catherine did not press him, but she stayed close, and William kept the pages beside him. Then another record surfaced. The diary explained the fear, but not the concealment. An archival memorandum, a written record preserving what happened inside the royal collection, pointed back to one private encounter involving Camilla and a senior custodian years earlier. That discovery sent everyone backward, toward the day an uncomfortable secret became something someone wanted sealed forever. Every royal crisis has a moment that seems insignificant until history circles back to it. In this story, that moment came during a private gathering at Windsor, when an archival custodian quietly informed Camilla that Elizabeth had ordered several handwritten notebooks preserved separately from her ordinary papers. What happened next lasted less than 15 minutes. Yet years later, those 15 minutes would become the point investigators, lawyers, William, and even Charles could no longer ignore. Camilla had not expected the conversation to become a record. Sir Adrian Mercer spoke carefully, explaining that royal archival custody, the controlled preservation of sovereign papers under legal, historical, and household rules, meant no family member could decide what survived or disappeared. The notebooks were unusually sensitive because Elizabeth had mixed personal reflections with concerns about constitutional reputation and family unity. Camilla understood immediately why that mattered. If those pages surfaced later, private pain could become public judgment. Camilla waited until the briefing ended before asking Mercer to remain. She then asked whether several of Elizabeth's handwritten notebooks could be placed under a permanent restricted classification, meaning they would be sealed from access indefinitely. His answer was immediate. He could not promise permanent suppression. The Queen Consort's tone sharpened. She warned that the material could injure people who cannot answer back. Mercer did not argue. He simply closed the archive folder and told her preservation was not the same as publication, and that he would record her request rather than carry it out. Elizabeth learned of that exchange through a documented archival memorandum prepared after the Windsor meeting. The Queen read the account in private and reacted with quiet displeasure, not fury. She instructed Mercer that no single member of the family was to gain unilateral control over the notebooks. The monarch's concern was larger than one dispute. If private influence could erase uncomfortable records, future generations might inherit a cleaned version of history rather than the truth. Mercer followed her instruction exactly, and Elizabeth made sure the order itself was preserved. Then the safeguard became even more deliberate. Elizabeth ordered a duplicate preservation package created, ensuring that if one archival route were ever blocked, another authenticated set would survive. She also left a coded instruction that William, as heir, should be notified if anyone attempted permanent destruction, removal, or suppression. The prince was never told the full reason at the time, and Charles never understood why his mother had built such a barrier. Now the condition had been triggered. Years of silence collapsed into one unavoidable meeting, because William no longer wanted explanations from lawyers. He wanted Camilla to tell him, directly, what she had wanted removed. William did not enter the room shouting. That made the confrontation worse. He arrived with one page, one archival memorandum, and one question. Charles remained seated. Camilla refused to lower her eyes. And when the prince asked whether she personally tried to ensure Elizabeth's diary could never be recovered, the silence became so complete that even the king understood there would be no graceful way out of this conversation. William placed the memorandum between them and waited. The archival memorandum, a formal written record preserving what was said and decided during the Windsor briefing, now proved that Camilla had asked for permanent restriction. The prince also understood why his grandmother had created a second preservation route, a backup system designed to keep authenticated papers safe if one archive became inaccessible. Charles tried to slow the moment down. He argued that restricting private papers was not the same as destroying them, hoping that legal distinction might soften the charge. William did not move. Camilla pushed the page back without reading it. She told William that she had never ordered anything destroyed, and the future king answered that this was not the question. He wanted to know why Elizabeth's own words had frightened her enough to seek permanent restriction. The queen consort finally admitted that she had made the request. She insisted her motive had been protection, not erasure. In her view, private pain written in confidence could be turned into a weapon against people still alive. William heard the explanation, but he did not accept that fear gave anyone the right to decide what history could survive. William then asked the question Charles had not expected. Had Camilla already read part of the diary before approaching the archive? For the first time, she hesitated. The king reached toward the memorandum, but neither of them acknowledged him. That pause carried more weight than any denial could have. William asked again, quieter now. Camilla finally admitted that Elizabeth had once shown her part of a handwritten entry during a difficult private conversation. Camilla explained that the passage concerned Diana, Charles, and William. Elizabeth had spoken about unresolved grief, the damage it could carry into the next generation, and her fear that old resentment might one day split the family again. Charles stared at his wife. He had spent years defending her, yet she had never told him his mother had shared those fears directly with her. William came seeking the truth about the diary, but Camilla's admission left Charles confronting a different betrayal. His wife had known what Elizabeth feared, and she had kept it from him. Camilla had influence inside the palace. Charles had authority as king. William carried the power of the future crown, but none of them controlled what happened next. The diary was now protected by a legal process deliberately placed outside private family bargaining. And when the senior archivist quietly explained that Elizabeth herself had built that safeguard, Camilla understood the cruelest part of the revelation. The late queen had anticipated the possibility that someone would try to stop these pages surviving. Sir Adrian Mercer entered carrying the written preservation instruction Elizabeth had approved years earlier. The court's preservation order, a legal direction placing the disputed material beyond private household control, meant Buckingham Palace could no longer decide whether the relevant pages survived, disappeared, or returned to secrecy. Instead, they were now part of an independent evidentiary process, meaning the material had to be handled as protected evidence rather than family property. Mercer explained this calmly, but every word tightened the room. Camilla listened. Charles did not. Charles asked whether there was any lawful route to reseal the pages. Mercer answered that the king could request privacy protections around sensitive personal details, but he could not erase authenticated evidence or remove it from the court process. That distinction mattered, because Charles could still defend his family's dignity, but he could no longer control the existence of the record itself. The monarch pressed again, asking whether an exception could be made. Mercer refused to offer false hope. Camilla finally interrupted. When Charles began arguing that further release could destroy her reputation, she told him to stop. The queen consort would not allow it to look as though she needed the crown to silence his mother. Her words surprised him. For years he had protected her instinctively, yet now she understood that every attempt at protection could be interpreted as another attempt at suppression. Charles fell silent, and Mercer opened the second part of Elizabeth's instruction. Mercer then revealed, through the documented archival record, that the Queen had added the preservation safeguard only days after learning of Camilla's Windsor request. The wording was painfully precise. It prohibited destruction, private removal, or indefinite suppression, making the order appear deliberately shaped around the exact danger Elizabeth believed might arise. Camilla understood immediately. This had not been a routine precaution. The monarch had responded directly to what she feared could happen. Mercer handed Charles the preservation order. The king read it once, set it beside his mother's diary, and looked at Camilla. She planned for this, he said quietly. And when Elizabeth's reasoning was finally prepared for release, Camilla realized the deepest wound would not be accusation. It would be discovering that the queen had not trusted silence to protect the truth. There is a difference between being condemned and being doubted. Camilla had prepared herself for anger from William and disappointment from Charles. What she had not prepared for was Elizabeth's quieter judgment. The diary did not portray a villain. It recorded a queen afraid that old wounds, if buried instead of faced, would one day break open under greater pressure. And for Camilla, that measured disappointment proved far harder to fight. Camilla listened as the newly released entry was read from the authenticated court record. The passage argued that suppressing painful history would not protect the monarchy. It would simply pass unresolved resentment into William's generation. Elizabeth drew a line between family memory and institutional history, meaning the difference between private feelings remembered inside a family and records preserved because they shaped the crown itself. Private embarrassment, she believed, could not automatically become a reason to erase what future generations might need to understand. Camilla said nothing until the reading ended. She removed her glasses and admitted to Charles that she had always believed the notebooks would be interpreted through Diana, no matter what else they contained. That fear mattered because every mention of the past risked reopening old wounds around his first marriage and William's grief. The Queen Consort said she had wanted to prevent another cycle of accusation. Charles understood the fear. What he could not understand was why she had hidden Elizabeth's earlier conversation from him. Charles asked her directly why he had been allowed to defend her for years without knowing the full story. Camilla answered that she had thought silence would spare him another conflict between wife and mother. The king rejected that logic. Protection built on omission, he told her, had left him defending something he did not fully understand. His disappointment was controlled, but that restraint made it heavier. Camilla had expected anger. She had not expected distance. William then received a second extract through the documented archival release. It confirmed that Elizabeth had spoken privately with him years before her death about resisting the temptation to rewrite pain into comfort. The prince suddenly understood that his grandmother had been preparing him for this exact kind of crisis without naming Camilla or exposing the dispute. She had trusted him with the principle before giving him the facts. Palace advisors suspended every effort to challenge the archive order. Continued resistance, they warned, would make protection look like suppression. After Charles left, Camilla remained beside the unopened second extract, unable to turn the page. Yet the decisive conversation would not happen before advisors or lawyers. It would happen behind a closed door between a father and the son who would one day inherit everything. No lawyers entered. No private secretaries took notes. No archivist sat between them. Charles closed the door himself and asked William to stay. For years, father and son had learned how to discuss the monarchy without discussing the wounds beneath it. This time, they did the opposite. They spoke about Diana. They spoke about Elizabeth. And finally, they spoke about Camilla, not as a queen, but as the woman standing at the center of an old family fracture. Charles began without defending himself. He admitted that his instinct had always been to protect Camilla because he remembered the years when every controversy around her became personal punishment. The king knew that protection had shaped his reactions long before the diary returned. William understood that history, but he told his father that his anger was not about humiliating her. The prince wanted one thing preserved: Elizabeth's historical record, meaning the documents and testimony, kept so future generations could understand what truly happened, could not be altered simply because the truth hurt. William chose his next words carefully. Charles asked whether he believed Camilla had deliberately tried to erase Elizabeth's judgment. His son answered that fear had driven her further than she should have gone, but he stopped short of calling it calculated destruction. Then the future king admitted something harder. Anything connected to Diana made perfect objectivity almost impossible for him. Charles did not challenge that confession. He simply nodded, and for the first time since the diary opened, father and son stopped arguing over motives. Charles then confessed what still wounded him most. Camilla had never told him that Elizabeth personally showed her the disputed diary passage, and the omission had damaged his trust. The monarch said he could defend a frightened decision more easily than years of silence. William heard the pain beneath the words, and refused to turn it into an advantage. "I don't need revenge," he said. Charles extended his hand across the table. His son took it. William proposed something narrower and harder than punishment. Camilla should acknowledge the suppression request privately to the family and abandon every remaining effort to reseal the material. That would preserve Elizabeth's record without turning the Queen Consort into a public target. Charles agreed, but he made one condition clear. She had to choose that path herself. Neither man would force the confession and call it reconciliation. Both men knew the next hours would test it. Then the outside world caught up. While father and son were finding a fragile peace, the court release was already moving beyond palace control. The family had chosen restraint, but outside the palace gates, restraint was about to disappear completely. By morning, the secret no longer belonged to the court. It belonged to millions of strangers. Headlines raced ahead of context. Television panels dissected Elizabeth's words sentence by sentence. Outside royal gates, cameras gathered before sunrise. Yet inside the palace, Camilla was discovering something far more painful than public embarrassment. A private fear she had tried to contain had now become the defining image attached to her name. Camilla watched the first television bulletin alone. British broadcasters led with the court's decision to unseal the diary and focused heavily on Elizabeth's safeguard against permanent suppression. The palace communications team, the staff responsible for shaping official public statements and handling media response, issued only a restrained acknowledgement that both the archival and court processes would be respected. That mattered because any attack on the late Queen's record could look like another attempt to bury what she had deliberately preserved. Charles entered while Camilla's photograph filled the screen beneath the breaking headline. The king reached for the remote and turned the television off. She looked at him for a moment, then told him to switch it back on. The Queen Consort said she needed to hear what people were saying, even if every sentence hurt. Charles hesitated, but obeyed. Camilla listened as commentators reduced years of fear, grief, and secrecy into a few brutal phrases. When her own face appeared again, she reached toward the remote, stopped, and deliberately placed her hand back on the table. William faced a different pressure. Advisors urged the prince to respond, while public sympathy appeared to be moving toward Elizabeth's position, but he refused to turn the moment into victory. In a private documented briefing, he said, using his grandmother's diary as a weapon would repeat the very mistake she had warned against, converting pain into something that could be controlled for advantage. The future king wanted the record preserved, not exploited, and Charles later learned of that decision with quiet relief. Outside Buckingham Palace, the frenzy became impossible to ignore. A morning newspaper was held toward television cameras, carrying the fictional front-page headline, "The Queen kept a second copy." A small crowd gathered as broadcasters repeatedly returned to the court sketch and the archive boxes connected to the proceedings. At first, the story was framed as Camilla against Elizabeth. Then the full passage began changing the tone. The Queen's larger warning was not simply about one woman. It was about the danger of erasing difficult history. Camilla finally understood what remained within her control. She could not change the public verdict, but she could still decide what Charles, William, and the family remembered about her response. With the nation judging her past decision, she prepared to make one final choice. Camilla could not bury the diary again. Charles could not shield her from every consequence. William could not undo the history that made its pages painful. By the final meeting, all three understood that the only choice left was what they did with the truth between them. There was no dramatic victory waiting. Instead, there was something rarer inside royal life, an acknowledgement that protecting a family and protecting its history were not always the same thing. Camilla spoke first. She told Charles and William that she had made the Windsor request and accepted that seeking permanent restriction had crossed a line, even though she believed she was preventing future harm. The Queen Consort did not excuse the decision. She admitted that fear had shaped it. William listened without interrupting, then told her Elizabeth's historical record would remain intact. The prince also made something clear. He would not use those pages to punish her forever. Charles answered with restraint. He told Camilla their marriage would survive, but trust had changed. The king asked her never again to conceal a conversation involving decisions about Elizabeth's historical papers. That mattered, because archival preservation, the formal protection of records so they survive beyond personal preference, could not depend on who felt wounded by what those records contained. Camilla accepted the boundary. For once, she did not argue. Camilla then signed the withdrawal of every objection to preserving the diary. She placed the pen down and pushed the paper toward William. He looked at it, then at her, and nodded. The future king had protected his grandmother's record without turning Diana's memory into a weapon, and Charles had chosen loyalty without pretending nothing had happened. The family had not returned to innocence. It had reached acceptance. Elizabeth's safeguard had succeeded. The diary survived, not because it destroyed Camilla, but because uncomfortable history remained intact, even when powerful people wished it could disappear. Her instruction had protected more than pages. It had protected the monarchy from the temptation to rewrite pain into comfort. The verdict was final. Camilla remained beside Charles, changed by the knowledge that fear had pushed her toward concealment. William walked away without revenge. Charles remained loyal, without denying the wound. And the monarchy learned Elizabeth's lesson: buried pain does not vanish. Truth can wound a family, but concealment can destroy trust. The diary Elizabeth refused to let vanish had finally done what she intended: not destroy the family, but force it to face the history none of them could safely bury again. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.